Welcome to another episode of Mind the Autism podcast with Stone G. And I say this all the time. We are blessed right now to be in the presence of a genius. I do not say that flippantly. He is a real, true life genius, and I had the good fortune of seeing one of his performances live and decided that he is the embodiment of the word, and this is made up, you can't find it in a dictionary, a multidimensionalist. JD is a comedian and so much more. And we're going to get into it. We're going to have an authentic and deep conversation about all things neurodiverse, and we're going to listen to his life experience. JD, why don't you start and just tell us a little bit about your story.
Thank you, Stone. It's such a pleasure to be here. I'm so incredibly honored, and thank you for that wonderful feedback and those very kind words. I am just getting started on the best part of my creative journey. I've been on this creative journey for over 40 years now, but the best part is just beginning now, and it's a very, very exciting place to be at. But to start and give a bit of a context of where I come from, I was born to a pair of 14-year-olds in Palmerston North in Aotearoa, New Zealand back in 1982. Both of my birth parents had Maori fathers and Pakeha, Northern European white New Zealand mothers. One had Celtic ancestry, the other Germanic. And I was adopted by a couple of Australian academic university lecturers who were both the children of couples who were Salvation Army church leaders. So if you can imagine all of the significant adults in my family being people who performed or spoke on stages in front of large groups of people, it's not something that I've ever found foreign to me in any way. I grew up in a very small country village on the southwestern outskirts of Sydney called Cobbitty. And I took to the stage from a very early age, learning piano and singing, and then leading the worship in the Salvation Army Church, where I really developed a lot of my stage skills, did a lot of church, school, and community plays and musicals throughout my childhood. And my first paid work ever was at the age of 12. I was in a Sydney Opera House production of the Puccini opera Tosca as an altar boy. And then I went on to study theatre at Wollongong University. After graduating, I lived in a tent for 9 months, travelling the east coast of Australia, picking fruit and vegetables and saving money to do a course in English teaching. Then I moved to China to teach English and learn Mandarin, returned to Sydney, did a master's in business, moved to London, lived there for 4 years and started comedy while I was there in 2016. And I've been back here since the end of 2017.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, that's a lot.
That's the shortest way I can put it all together, you know?
Yeah, and anyone listening to
that's such a summary.
Yeah.
Tip of the iceberg.
And anyone listening to that is going to know that there is so much more. That's incredible. So this is how you're coming to the stage. I think your audience, they need to be ready, because it's not for someone who is passive. They need to
not for the
have
faint-hearted.
Purpose.
Yep. And it really celebrates the othered and people who feel different, and anyone who's had an experience of being othered or feeling different in any way will hopefully leave one of my shows feeling pretty magnificent about themselves and knowing how important it is to be unique and how worthy it is of celebration. And those who haven't experienced that in a way that's tangible for them will experience it during my show.
Yeah, I can definitely attest to that. It was such a magical experience. I am not usually surprised, and I absolutely was. It was a phenomenal experience.
That's
Um,
how I judge
ki-
comedy. That's how I judge whether I think comedy is of any entertainment value to me personally, is whether it surprises me, because I also consume very large quantities of comedy. So when I get a surprise, that's when I go, ah, that's good stuff. So that's what I aim to do for my own
mm,
audiences.
yeah, nailed it. Can you share a little bit more about your comedic journey?
Absolutely. So I started in 2016 in the London open mic circuit, which is both terrifying because British comedy is such a legacy institution, but at the same time, it's so London is such a multicultural city that you can be any type of comic and people will give you a go. So it was exciting to approach it in a place where you could try anything and people would be receptive to it. Some of the other places where I've done lots of open mics tend to be a lot more conservative, and you've really got to try and fit a certain mold. Like just Australian suburban open mics. You've got to, even though I don't fit a mold, you can really alienate an audience very quickly if you come in all guns blazing in a way that they're just not expecting. So you've got to kind of find the way into the right audience. So I really enjoyed doing that comedy, and then I decided in 2017 I was going to move into a camper van and drive across Europe for 4 months. And I made a 24-part YouTube series about places with food named after them called Jason's Tasty Places, still available on YouTube. So I stopped in a whole lot of places. I drove from London to Montenegro. Did my first episode on London dry gin, and I went via Cheddar Gorge, where cheddar cheese comes from, and then into Spain and Portugal and Germany and France. I went to places like Dijon for the mustard and to Modena in Italy for the balsamic vinegar. I went to Champagne and Prosecco and Brie and Valencia and Sardinia and had the most incredible journey. And throughout the series, I just get fatter and fatter, which I think is a really fun way to watch it consecutively and just see my weight ballooning. Because it was a gustatory experience.
We'll put the link of that in the show notes so people can check that out as well.
Yeah, yeah. And then I moved back to Australia. I did my first solo show off the back of that, which was lamenting the lack of commercial success that it had had. So the title of that show was How Not to Be a YouTube Sensation. And it was a meta-analysis of other YouTube channels that were objectively worse than mine, but far more successful. One example was a channel called John Drinks Water, which is a guy drinks a bottle of water each day, and that's all he does. He just drinks the bottle of water. And he had tens of thousands of subscribers, all just watching him just drink a bottle of water, sometimes 2 or 3 times a day. No speaking, nothing at all. Just he drinks a bottle of water. And some of these having
Wow.
tens of thousands of views. So me trying to work out what is it that's making people want to engage with this. He did do one episode that was a little different called John Drinks Bleach. Didn't work out well. So don't know if John's still with us.
Whoops. There's
Yeah.
there's a question that we ask everyone who comes on, and it's about what is your thinking and feeling. I say thinking because sometimes people are in their head, and feeling, some people don't like. It's like feeling. I'm not feeling anything, but so I ask both. So what's your thinking and feeling on an international neurodivergent community and or state versus inclusion within the presently existing neurotypical world?
There hasn't been, I don't think, enough time with neurodiversity as part of the public consciousness for a grassroots movement to have developed organically to a level where we're going to see a large scale adoption of community movement, but with the right motivation and right drive, it's definitely time for something like that to start happening. I have a unique perspective on community movements because, as a queer person and as someone who has worked within the LGBTQAI plus pride movement, I was the head of partnerships at Sydney Gay and Lesbian Mardi Gras for 2 years. I can see the challenges of unifying groups of people who have an overarching commonality, but huge diversity of experience, perspective, and approach. So in a queer context, looking at LGBT elders, for example, who do not like the word queer because they haven't personally felt comfortable reclaiming it. And then the needs of, say, the motorcycle enthusiast lesbians versus the dance party twinkie young gay boys versus high school student transgender individuals who require specific types of support and events and focus. They're so disparate in their needs, but they wish to be unified under a movement. So that creates some really unique challenges in terms of providing opportunities for agency and avenues for communication so that people can make those needs known and understood. But coordination is a huge challenge, but I think it's possible and it does work. The pitfall to try and avoid is having a movement splinter too much into political factions that start warring against each other. That can be a real
Yes.
difficulty. And we already see that on some scale within the global neurodiverse conversation. Wouldn't call it a movement or a community, but the conversation around, are we going to talk about disability? Are we going to talk about, hyperability or superpower? Where do these things intersect? Are we going to talk beyond that and about all of the things that make up a neurodiverse individual that perhaps don't even need a value judgment on them, that they just are. They simply are things that exist, that we don't need to think of them as positive or negative. And not to say that disability is negative as well, because that's a really important thing that I think we're trying to address, is this idea that disability doesn't make somebody less than. And it's harder, I think, on a fundamental level to, even with the construction of the language, disability, it's got a negative prefix. In terms of getting past issues like racism and seeing people of different races as less than, that's something that many evolved people have managed to leave in the past. But disability as not less than it's still, I think there's a lot of work to be done there.
So very big question that will require more time.
Yes. Yeah. But there's definitely a great opportunity there.
Yes. Yeah. When we look at the statistics, some reports show that 90% of autistic or neurodiverse people don't have a binary experience of gender, which is social.
Exactly.
And
but that makes perfect sense to me, because autistic people generally find social constructs to be questionable at best. Even if we go along with them, I happily identify as a man, and I enjoy the trappings of masculinity to a point. But at the same time, I love to paint my nails, and if anyone tells me I can't, then that's their problem.
Love it.
I don't do it because I feel any less than anything other than entirely a man. I do it because I like it and it looks great and it's fun and people compliment me on it. Like a dopamine.
Can you talk about being relatable? So many people So let me frame where the question is coming from. Sometimes people will say, uh, from a relationship context, that people in a relationship need to have the same values, and they don't. That's not a necessary ingredient for necessary ingredient for an effective relationship. And the same thing when it comes to being a performer. Maybe it's necessary to be relatable. Maybe it's not. With your performance, and this is just my experience of it, I didn't feel that I needed to have a visceral experience of all these things that you were describing. Yet I was still able to take the content and personalize it to me. And once I did that, it just it it grew, and it was magical. So, what are your thoughts about this thing? Oh, you got to be relatable. You got to be relatable. You got to be relatable. What are your feelings on that?
I think most comedians need to be relatable to some degree, except perhaps those whose comedy hinges entirely on absurdity. But if we look at the concept of the everyman, and one of the most common everymen that's usually thrown out into the conversation is somebody like Homer Simpson, who is so flawed in so many ways, but so relatable in so many ways to so many people. Being or having all of the identities that I have as someone who is queer and neurodivergent and disabled and indigenous and multilingual and multinational, and yet if I don't point those things out, and certainly before when I have my natural hair color, I can fly under the radar and pass as everything that I'm not. Straight, white, neurotypical, able-bodied, native English-speaking, Australian, monocultural. I can be all of those things if I don't open my mouth or take off my hat. So that's a really interesting nexus to inhabit, because I can turn on or off in my everyday life. And this is an incredible point of privilege to have as well. And I'm acutely aware of this, to be able to turn on or off the visibility of my otherness. And that allows me access to places and spaces and conversations and people that people who can't turn that on and off don't have access to. So I feel a responsibility to use that privilege to bridge the gap between the worlds I get to inhabit because of the way I am privileged enough to be able to present myself, and the worlds of the identities that truly make up who I am. And by playing those identities out on stage and pointing them out while wrapped up in this appearance of a straight white dude character, visually, it marries those worlds, I think, in a really unique way. So instead of the everyman, I consider myself the every underdog, and the packaging that this comes in allows me to infiltrate. And even when it comes to being more exposed in the media, being on television and things, people won't necessarily tune out quite as quickly as they might if I looked like one of those demographics that they're trying not to engage with or trying not to think about. I don't look like those demographics, so maybe they'll listen just that little bit longer. And it also, has made me privy to a lot of conversations that can be a little upsetting at times. And sometimes I just have to self-identify to let people know that, hey, just because I look a certain way to you doesn't mean that the kinds of things that you think are okay to say in front of me.
And this responsibility that you've identified, is that something that's present with you as part of your decision criteria and as part of how you live your life? This
Absolutely.
responsibility to be able to bridge the gap for those who might not have
Yes.
access.
Yeah. And I no longer take any effort to turn off my visibility. I used to when I was still working out who I was, but these days, you know, somebody asked me why I started dyeing my hair funny colors. It's not that I started doing it, it's that I stopped not doing it. And there is a clear distinction there. I always wanted to. Ever since I was 12 years old, I have wanted to have brightly colored hair, but I've always felt that I had to not do it for other people, for employers or for my parents or for the school I went to or whatever. There's always been something getting in my way, and I'm thinking I'm trying to please someone else by not appearing the way I want to appear. When I was less comfortable with my sexuality, I wouldn't paint my nails because I wanted to be perceived as being a certain type of masculine. And before I had really connected with my First Nations heritage, I also didn't outwardly wear symbols of being a Maori person. But now I paint my nails, I dye my hair, and I wear my pounamu because it's important to me that people do read these things if they can piece it together. And at least I'm no longer hiding my light under a bushel, to use a biblical phrase, and then just being really, really vocal and open about it, because I don't want people to think I'm a suburban dad, straight white guy anymore. I just no, it's not who I am. I really want to live my authenticity.
In what you've been sharing, you've outlined, and I might put this in the show notes as well, the ingredients for longevity. And these are longevity ingredients that have been identified in all of the blue zones. So I'll put that in there. This is beautiful.
I went from self-acceptance to self-celebration.
Love that. Yeah, that's and to say that, I think a lot of people could hear something like that, but not really understand the gravity of what it takes to be it.
And now it's a party that everyone's invited to.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
What do you think are some specific attributes for effective neurodiverse relationships? Do you think that there's anything different, or is there some nuance that neurodiverse people should focus on?
It depends on your neurodiverse profile and which conditions you have. For my and even within that, everyone's got a different experience, but there are certain commonalities, and particularly with the big ones like ADHD and autism, the very commonly experienced neurodiverse conditions, tends to be, in my experience with myself and my neurodiverse friends, a vulnerability to people who present themselves inauthentically, and being able to read the motivations of people when they're not coming from a place of when their motivations aren't coming from a healthy place that is going to lead to healthy behaviors and healthy relationships.
So is that internalized ableism you're describing?
That's one part of it, and the other is a particular. This is also a neurodiverse condition, and I don't wish to demonize it in any way, but there is a particular personality disorder profile that I have found myself very vulnerable to at times, and I've only, over the past few years, learned to read the red flags of that personality type, and it's the narcissistic personality type, because of the manipulation that comes with that. There are certain vulnerabilities that I have experienced myself, and some of my friends. So it's really important to educate yourself, I think, about what some of those red flags are, to know how to protect yourself against people who may not have the purest intentions. So I think the beginning of that, though, is just very simply being very honest with yourself and saying to yourself, is this person a healthy and balanced person? Are they expressing themselves in ways that appear to be healthy and balanced? Do they make me feel comfortable? Or do I have an anxiety attack every time I think about going and spending time with them? Because if it's the latter, then there's something's not off, something's not right. You've got to listen to your internal systems as well. And I've had to end friendships with people because that was precisely the case. And thinking they're presenting themselves as a nice person, and everyone's telling me they're a nice person, but so why am I feeling such anxiety? And it was because I was being manipulated in ways that I wasn't picking up, And are they capable of healthy and balanced relationships? Can I read their motivations accurately? How do they express self-awareness? And this is the really big one. How do they express self-awareness? How do they respect boundaries? How do they express accountability? And what is their willingness to learn and grow? If you ask those questions honestly about any relationship that you're questioning or concerned about, you'll find the answer as to whether or not this is a good relationship for you. And that goes to not just people who display traits of narcissism, but really anybody. So again, self-awareness, accountability, willingness to learn and grow, really huge.
And that, thank you for
And
that.
boundaries,
That's
big one.
yes. That's actually a perfect segue into the cards that you shared in your performance, which had all the multidimensionality, and yeah, that's a word, that you are and that you embody, and that you're, I guess, inviting people to take a bath in or swim in or
Celebrate with me.
immerse
Join the party.
themselves. Yes. Yeah. So let's talk about your cards. They're fantastic, by the way, because it got me thinking about my own proclivities as I was reading them. And I remember when you handed me a stack, I did the typical autistic thing, and I said, "Oh, some of these are upside down, and some of these that the numbers are not. It's not sequential." And I started putting them sequentially, and then said, "Oh, wait a minute! Some of these are different colors, and they're different categories." So I had to make sure that all the categories matched, and then they were all sequential, and they were all right side up, and but in doing that, I got this broad experience of all of my nuances, even the bits that are locked away in the basement,
Yeah.
and I haven't let them out.
Mm.
So yeah, let's talk about your cards.
It really unlocks a lot of things for people. And so what fascinated me when I got my ADHD diagnosis was I started to look into which areas of my life or my body or my mind or my behavior had the potential to have been influenced, or my development to be influenced by it. And that rabbit hole goes so deep. The symptoms and correlations and comorbidities for ADHD alone are just staggering. And then you add a layer of ASD on top of that, and you get a lot of crossover and then a lot of additional. And that journey of understanding the ADHD profile also led to a lot of questions as well, as many questions as there were answers, because there are a lot of things that I clearly related to, but a lot of things that just didn't fit with ADHD on its own, which is why I had to keep looking further and working with my psychiatrist to understand why is this profile why are some parts of this profile so out of alignment with the generally experienced ADHD profile. Like one little example is a lot of people with ADHD saying, I always forget to brush my teeth. Now, I couldn't do that because I'd get to 11 o'clock in the morning and my teeth would feel like were covered in fur, and then I'd have to go to the bathroom and get like the corner of my t-shirt and then like scrub my teeth. So if I forget, like I only temporarily forget, and as soon as I can get a toothbrush, I'm in there. And it's because of my sensory issues. It's a physical sensation of it that I can't ignore. and the fact that a lot of people with ADHD are not very well, organized, or they're messy. I mean, if you look at my email, everything is filed all the time. As soon as an email comes in, it has to be processed. It has to either go to a file or it gets deleted. This isn't the way people with ADHD often experience organizing things. So then looking into these other things, there had to be something else going on. So then I got my AUDHD profile. It started to make a whole lot more sense. And then I looked into other types of neurodiversity and saw more crossovers and more Venn diagrams. And it just started to feel, the only way I could picture it in my mind's eye was a card collection. It just kind of came to me as this framework on top of which everything just fit. We had the conditions, and then we had all these related symptoms and signs and correlations and comorbidities, but there was so much interplay between them that it just organically grew in my mind as a concept.
I don't tend to use the word fun because I'm only just this year starting to discover what that means.
The F word,
And
yeah.
yes, and these cards are fun.
They are
They're
fun.
they're so fun. And what I'm reminded of as you're talking about them is that so many people get into relationships, whatever kind of relationship it is. It doesn't have to be intimate. And they have these expectations about how the other person is going to relate to them or engage with them, when most of the time people don't take a moment to be introspective and understand self. What are the mechanics? What are some of the ingredients? Why am I this way? Why do I tell the stories that I tell? What is my actual secret story? A lot of people don't know that, so they enter into a relationship and they have the secret story that is running all the results and experiences of their life, and then they're blaming it on another human being. And so these cards are really fun and informative and evidence-based way for someone to be able to understand what's happening with me. Why do I keep having the same results in all of the environments that I go in?
Mm.
So these cards are, they are, you just brought in all this. We're just going to have to call it magic, because you took this creativity, you made it fun, you brought together all the evidence and science. So your conscientious nerds, that box is ticked, and your people who need a kinesthetic approach, or they need colors, that box, everyone's needs are met by.
Almost. I've been working with Access Arts on some concepts for different designs that will have different types of accessibility, like a Braille deck, for example.
Wow.
So some different ways, or for other forms. Also, there is one fundamental problem with this prototype, and that is that the conditions themselves are written in this tiny, tiny little font right down the bottom. Now, I have visual
Yeah.
hyperacuity, so when I designed them, they were fine for me. And I just forgot, because of a hyper ability I have, that not everyone can read tiny writing. I can read tiny writing from a very long distance or from very close up. I have this supervision, I guess. It also leads to, I see colors more brightly. I see lights can be very dazzling. But it just didn't cross my mind that it could be too small for other people. So
Yeah. Yeah.
so many people pick them up and they go, "Oh, what on earth does that say?" So and they're just people with average view, visible, average sight. So I just have to. There's some redesigning that's going to go on, but no, I do think they're a lot of fun, and it's not just about educating people who experience these conditions and these symptoms, but also people who don't, or people who are not neurodiverse who may experience some of these symptoms in different ways, such as anxiety or depression or overcommitting. And everyone I have spoken to, and this is more important to every neurotypical person I have shown them to, can find a card in there that they relate to. They've either had insomnia at some point or a stutter, or, there's just so many little things that people, I've never shown the cards to a neurotypical person and have them say, well, there's just nothing in there that I've ever experienced. They have told me they think there won't be anything, and then they pick up allergies or asthma. Because seriously, every person with ADHD I know has asthma, including myself. Doesn't mean that we all have asthma, but there is a strong correlation there. And same with the allergies, because they're both histamine reactions.
Yes. Yeah. One of mine is epilepsy.
There you go.
Which a lot of autistic people experience that.
I've got another 100. I've got another 100 cards in development. It's on that set, but it's not in the current set.
And I like what you said about the way the typeface is positioned, because I did have to get someone else to read, so I couldn't see the writing. Also, I'm thinking that, and I'm sure you've already considered this, but I'm thinking that any and every mental health practitioner, psychologist, psychiatrist, social workers in Australia, support coordinators and support workers, it would be in their best interest to have these cards, especially if they are serious about working with their clients.
Absolutely. My mother, my adoptive mother, is a recently retired professor of neurodiversity, and her academic focus for the last few decades has been autism. She's been published multiple times. She's written textbooks on autism, mostly in an educational and especially early childhood context. And she's traveled the world, delivering at multiple conferences on the topic. So I've used her as a consultative resource to ensure that it is academically sound and scientifically sound. And also I just self-educate as much as I can to stay ahead of the curve on what current research is saying, because it is an area that is rapidly developing, especially since the big wave of newly diagnosed, self-diagnosed and self-suspecting people that came out of the massive lifestyle changes brought on by the pandemic. But even in my own lifetime, when I was 10 years old, I was sent to a psychologist because I was disruptive in class. And the results came back that I had the highest IQ out of any child who had been tested in my region of Southwest Sydney, and that I had all of the indicators of ADHD. But back in 1992, when this was done, ADHD was considered to be a learning disability. So they said I couldn't possibly have ADHD. I must just be gifted. And it didn't make any sense to anyone at that point, or all the way through the rest of my school, my time at school, why I was so proficient with language and so terrible at mathematics, and that these two things couldn't keep up. And I was fine through primary school mathematics, and it just stopped at that point. And then I just it couldn't keep up. And yet I was achieving way above my expectations in English. But then, in mathematics and mathematically related subjects, it was such a struggle, and I was right down the bottom of the class. And this disparity between my perceived abilities didn't make sense to anyone, because if I was just a gifted child, I should be good at all the things. But it was very confusing and very frustrating, and it led to a lot of heartache, especially with academic parents who were expecting a certain level of achievement. Like, I'm just not trying hard enough in maths. What's the problem?
Yeah.
Turns out I have hyperlexia and dyscalculia. There we go. Because I taught myself to read when I was 3 years old. and I still can't
Yeah,
find a percentage. I'm 41 years old. So
yeah, yeah. I identify with that. I was the same. I was hyperlexic. So
yeah,
3 years old. Same thing.
yeah.
Um, so we've actually gone over time, but it was really necessary to hear about the cards. And I
There's one
know
more thing
there's
I'd like to
still,
tell you about them if we've just got a
please,
couple of moments. Yeah.
please, yes, absolutely.
So beyond the collectability and playability and the educational side of things, one thing I really want to, part of my vision for the cards is to build community and that relatability, but also to provide opportunities for a community to collaborate further. So I've created these characters, I've created these little images, and um, I would love for neurodiverse artists to reinterpret my characters and be credited for it and paid for it to be a part of that, because they're going to be commercially available, but through a not-for-profit business model, I think would be ideal, and to allow that collaboration and contribution, and to give artists opportunities to have their work, credited on a large scale to people who are participating in buying, but at the same time to reinvest the profits into, this is something I feel incredibly passionate about, a foundation that would fund diagnoses for people who suspect that they have neurodiverse conditions, because it is prohibitively expensive for far too many people. And I believe that a society in which neurodiverse people are properly diagnosed and have access to the care and supports that they need would be a much healthier society. Overall, it benefits everybody. And I
And
know people who have all of the same uh, neurodiverse symptoms and profiles that I do, who simply don't have $1,500 to drop on a diagnosis with a psychiatrist. And if the funds that come from the production and sales of these cards could help people access that kind of medical support and care, I just think the benefits of that would have an incredible ripple effect.
And do you foresee this organization being international, or maybe starting off with Australia?
Start local, move global.
Fantastic, fantastic. Oh, wow. Yeah, I've received all the nutrition in this meal, all of it for the entire day. It's fantastic. Um,
So have I. Thank you. It's always fun to be able to, not just fun, but as you say, nourishing to be able to share these ideas with someone in a conversation, especially a recorded one, because they're ideas that float around in my head, and sometimes I write them down, but to have them in an interchange with someone brings them to a new level of tangibility for me. So thank you for that opportunity.
yeah, I feel very fortunate to be having this conversation.
Likewise.
Uh, what is a way that people listening can substantively support your journey, as an individual or maybe as an organization? They see your work and they say, we want to get behind what he's doing.
As I aim to represent a lot of different communities and bring visibility to them, I still only have my own lived experience and my understanding of other people's lived experiences, but there's still so much diversity out there. I would just appreciate any feedback, any suggestions that would further enrich my understanding of the breadth of people's experiences. So whether that's commenting on my social media, or even I've got a contact form on my website where you can provide feedback on any aspect of my work, that would be really, really helpful. I just want to hear as much as I can from people, because neurodiversity is absolutely one of my special interests. Ever since I got that diagnosis of ADHD, I'm truly obsessed with it as a concept, and I wish to absorb as much information as I possibly can about it. So please feed me that sweet, sweet, sweet info.
And side note, it may end up as part of your performance.
It may, although I wouldn't share anything identifiable about anyone without
Yes,
their
of course.
consent,
Yes.
of course. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. We got that. Okay. Thank you so much for your time. You've been generous. You've been open. You've been authentic. As I said, I feel nourished from this conversation. I got to play a bigger game. that's yeah, that's my experience. I want to do more in this space, and I'm so honored that you took the time to have this conversation.
Well, what you're currently doing in providing opportunities for people to learn about the work that I'm doing and other people like myself are doing is definitely a very big game that you're playing in the best possible way. So thank you again for that opportunity. And I looked forward to this a lot, and it was even greater than I had been expecting.
Okay. Well, JD, I look forward to potentially other conversations that we can have on maybe more specific aspects of your work. I understand that you're going to be traveling internationally soon, and we definitely want to be hearing about that and share it with the wider audience.
I think it would be a lot of fun to do a check-in in about a year and just see the journey, and do a retrospective and just look back at where it began and where it's got to. I think we'll be in a really interesting place. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you for listening. Thank you for your attention. As I mentioned before, all of the details on JD are going to be in the show notes, as well as any citations that we mentioned. And your feedback is most welcome. Be blessed. Bye.